named Conger.
Yeah.
Who is used as a trope to showcase this Philip K. Dick story. Speaking about that, because I had read the story, so I already knew what you were doing. I believe that you mentioned it to me in a prior interaction. But the use of that and then how it turns to show his deceit is a very effective tool. I think this is a good example of, even though this is probably not as great a book as Norwegian, that you can pack more information in this, and that there's writing in this that is every bit as good or better than anything Norwegian.
Well, it's interesting because this fellow, this I think he's from Britain, had recently wanted to see some of my plays, and then he wanted to read one of my big books, so I gave him the Vincetti Brothers first. And in rereading the Vincetti Brothers, I have to say, I was surprised at how much in detail my descriptions of some of the people and the areas were. And it shows how just in 5 or 6 years, even though I had taken up the mantle of what do I call my term? I forget my own term for total immersion. Jessica says total immersion. even though I had taken up total immersion, I still was. The Vincetti Brothers is still probably now closer to Tumbleweeds in terms of its writing than it is to the stuff now. So there is a big break in a sense, even between Vincetti Brothers to Norwegian. But one of the things that's interesting is I allied a lot more. When I read the Vincetti Brothers, and even when I've read some portions of the Norwegian, I still was filling in gaps. Here, I'm making these books much more interactive in that you have to assume certain things. When, for example, well, just to use the Conger thing, I wanted to do a story where a character. I didn't want to do the sci-fi trope of traveling back in time. So in my universe, it's been scientifically proven at the moment that one cannot travel back in time. So time travel is out, and this is one of the big tropes there. So I said, but wouldn't it be interesting if I encountered a character from a public domain work of science fiction that was a time traveler, or thought he was a time traveler. So I said, let me look through Project Gutenberg and find a time travel story with a character. Now, I didn't expect, I wasn't going to go back as far as using, say, H.G. Wells's time traveler from the Time Machine. That would have been too obvious. And I think it was the third, or maybe the fourth story that I looked in Project Gutenberg. I bookmarked it, and I saw Philip K. Dick, and there's this story called The Skull, with this character called Omar Conger, who basically goes back in time. It's a society quite similar to the Goo, too, which provides another instance of parallelism, where this society that runs the politics of the era is battling this thing called the First Church. So it's the battle of political will versus religious theocracy, and the people who run the political end send this killer and hunter, this basically the guy who's an assassin, back in time 200 some years to Colorado in the 1950s to kill off the character who becomes known as the founder of the religious First Church. And just by reading the story and knowing the whole trope, you just know that it's going to turn out that Conger is the founder, and that by going back in time and by leapfrogging himself, he sets himself up that when the main story takes place in the past, he has already been seen before has been killed. He's been killed in the future. He comes back beforehand, and people are startled that when he comes back the second time, it's 6 months after he's been killed in his own timeline's future. So anyway, it's this very trite, very 1940s, 50s sci-fi travel kind of story, and it's written by Philip K. Dick, who I've mentioned before, I think is one of the most overrated writers. Even in some of his most acclaimed stories, he has some interesting ideas. He has zero ability at characterization. His dialogue is stilted and horrid. There's just nothing. He's an idea man. And I said, this is perfect. It apparently appeared in a magazine and wasn't renewed. And I trust Project Gutenberg because you can check and you can get the certificates and you can see that they looked it up, and you can look it up in the Library of Congress. There's no evidence that this story by Philip K. Dick called The Skull was ever renewed for copyright. So like It's a Wonderful Life, it fell into the public domain. I think it was published in 1957 or 59. In the mid-'80s, it fell into the public domain. Perfect. So let's take this story, and I have this supercomputer called Musette that runs the ship called the Fidanza, which means the true, the Fidel, the term is Italian. So on the Fidanza, Musette is the SC, the shipboard computer that runs everything, and it's a female computer. And here we get this character called Conga, who is found in this Shoni shrine. There's this, apparently 1,000 years before and a few hundred years before the Shon were discovered by humanity, this ship, this escape pod or whatnot, crashed onto the planet, and it's worshipped as a sign from the Shon at what they call the Waiting Wall. They don't have a Wailing Wall like they do in Jerusalem. They have the Waiting Wall. So when the crew of the Fidanza gets to Shoni, they go and they find this, and all of a sudden, just like in Alien, the pod opens up. Someone touches something or whatnot, the pod opens up, and there is Conga. And I call him Aloysius Conga. Aloysius Omar Conga is his real name in my universe. And he basically tells a very similar story. Instead of the first church, it's the third church. Instead of whatever the head of the government was called, I call him the Outkeeper or something. And I rework and deepen the story. I make the original Dick characters within the retelling of the story more interesting. But by the end of the book, we get a side-by-side comparison, and we find out that Musette is flawed. Musette should have easily spotted this stuff. Project Gutenberg and its successor systems or websites or whatever in plus space is the internet. It should have been an easy comparison, but Musette is fooled by the fact that when she was recording Conga's words, Conga was putting words in between the Dick words and was expanding things. And it shows that even though Musette is an artificial intelligence, and some of these shipboard computers, once they retire, have been granted the right to be placed inside the bodies of androids and become physical so that they can interact. Because we get the sense, it's said earlier that Musette may have been in love with the Fidanza's prior captain to Elias Walker. So that no matter how human these artificial intelligences are, they still can't get the obvious, because it's quite obvious when Walker and some of the other people see the stories side by side in hologram form that Musette should have easily recognized that it was a lie. And so here I'm giving the critique of artificial intelligence even 1,500 years from now, that there is still something uniquely human. And it gets back to why there's this stratified society, why when we get these essential characters that are created, these essential humans that are created in the end by Walker, the book is an exploration of what it's like to be human. And also,
I wanted to ask you, do you think anything that is created by human is in some ways always going to be human, or do you think that it can transpose itself into something else?
It can transpose itself, but it will be flawed, because if you have a flawed maker, those flaws are going to be there. And we see that even in the Shon. The Shon, for example, are godlike, but they have to be flawed, because if Baal is their creation, Baal is certainly flawed. He doesn't grasp certain concepts of humanities, like privacy or fair play.
But it's perfect,
yes. And so do a lot of characters like Hal. And we have the Hal 9000 analogs in Baal and Musette in different ways. Musette is clearly flawed, but she's not murderously flawed. Baal is clearly flawed. Even the Shon have to be flawed, because they don't seem to realize that once that what's called the extenders put on by Walker in what's called the theater of existence, he's going to do this murderous thing. Or maybe they do. We don't really know. But clearly, whether they do or they don't know that that's going to be the reaction, there's something wrong with them for subjecting Walker to this thing where he ends up killing all these people. There's something ethically flawed within these godlike creatures.